All right, welcome everyone. This is Meta. Welcome to Meta, conversations to provide wisdom, perspective, insight, hope, and courage beyond ourselves. I'm Pastor Ken, and from Every Nation Melbourne, and we have Pastor Edrei joining us all the way from Manila. It's 5 o'clock there. It's sunny. You can see the sun shining off his face. It's dark here in Melbourne. But I'm your host, like I said, Ken Johnston, and basically the purpose of these discussions or these conversations are to provide some encouragement. I was just thinking about how can I be, as a pastor, a spiritual leader of a community of people who love Jesus, how can I be providing some encouragement, while maintaining social distancing as is necessary because of COVID-19, and how can I be encouraging our Every Nation Melbourne members? And I thought, what, it'd be great. I know some people from around the world. I know some great people around the world, and Edrei is right up the top of that list. And I just wanted to show our Every Nation Melbourne members that we are connected to We are connected to
Yes.
a wider national and international movement that also exists to honor God and make disciples. That we're passionate. We're part of a global movement that's passionate about impacting the campus and planting churches. And so we just wanted to have this kind of conversation, just kind of a little bit informal, have it a bit
Yeah.
informative, but make it real, make it positive, honoring, all that kind of stuff. And tonight, as I mentioned already, my first guest is Pastor Edrei Canda. Pastor Edrei is a staff member at Every Nation Philippines, a lead pastor, and we'll find out about his involvement in campus, but he was definitely involved in campus the last time I was thinking about him. And he's the son of a pastor, so that's always interesting, being a pastor's kid. And he has been a regular visitor to Melbourne, or at least before COVID-19 kicked in. And
Yeah.
Edrei serves in and attends Victory Alabang. Edrei is also married to Tin, the awesome, intelligent, beautiful Tin, and who has actually also spent time in Melbourne, both for her work in software development, I believe, as well as ministry.
Yeah.
And just a little tidbit to throw in there, Edrei was the lead singer of a band in his youth. I think heavy metal, death metal, black metal, who knows what it was. And he used to have long hair, and maybe because of COVID-19, he will get long hair again.
Am I going back?
Welcome, Edrei, to join us. Maybe I'll just kick off with a first question. A bit of a surprise question, I suppose. What was
Okay.
you mentioned to me that you are now a lead pastor at one of the congregations at Victory Alabang, whereas before you were MPD staff member, now you're a
Yeah.
lead pastor. How do you feel about that? Is that the dream of every campus missionary to graduate, or maybe just talk us through that change in your
Okay.
life?
um, that decision isn't necessarily because of that. I think it's easier without the maintenance because in MPD I'd always have to like look for partners and maintain, meet up with partners also, or send in newsletters. I don't have to do that. I have more time to do other things. But that was kind of that space while I was doing that was kind of a more freeing thing, in a sense where I actually get to meet more potential partners, people from outside church. I'm not saying I'm not able to do that now, but it's not part of the job description anymore. So it's been a very interesting transition. I don't miss it yet. I might miss it in a few months. Who knows?
Okay. Because it seems like if you were an outsider looking in, you'd think, oh, stable salary, that kind of thing. It's a
Yeah.
promotion, right? It's a promotion of a sorts. But I know from my experience, and I think we've chatted about this before. From my experience, I'm still on MPD, but I was focused on campus, and then I was kind of asked to be senior pastor at Every Nation Melbourne. I ran from that. I didn't want that responsibility. I didn't want to have to do, be in charge of making all the
Yeah.
decisions and having the. How did you? Was there any trepidation with you in taking this step to be a lead pastor? Did
Yeah.
you see it as a promotion, or did you think, oh, it's just a more of a progression, a natural progression?
Yeah. I guess for me, it's more of like a change of role. This has been offered to me like maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. Um, it's been constantly offered to me every year. Obviously, I just only said somewhere like mid last year that I feel like I need to move on. But it's more of I think the shift of conversations I've been having with a lot of students that I was discipling. Some of them graduated already and didn't necessarily want to leave the group. We still meet up, but obviously the conversations will now change because now they're working. And I started noticing how a lot of our conversations would go from, because in every nation campus we always say change the campus, change the world.
Yes.
But from moving from from changing the campus, our discussions are starting to go more into how do we change the world now.
Yes.
Since they graduated, they start doing what they're doing. They're in different industries now. They're being influential in their industries. How do we do the change the world thing? And that's when I realized I feel like I needed a different platform now in order for me to really talk about changing the world, because obviously there are new campus guys that are doing what I've been doing before.
Yep.
It's time for them to take the reins and stuff.
Yep.
Now I'm really passionate about that. Like, how do we change the nation? How do we change the systems of the world? How do we change the injustice that we see? So
wow.
I'm kind of very into that. That's when I knew, okay, I think it's time for me to move on so that I can talk to adults now. So I can talk to not necessarily like a bigger audience, but an audience that had an immediate access to things that can change things, things that can change the world. So yeah, so I think that's where.
So it seems like to me, if I can summarize, you've basically have changed your role, but you've maintained your passion, which is to empower people to change the world. And as the people that you were connecting with and discipling started to move beyond campus, you kind of like pulled along with them. As the sheep grew up, so did the shepherd, in a sense.
Yeah, that's true.
That's cool, man.
Yeah.
So I loved hearing your heart about how you're just wanting to be used by God to change the world, and moving into a different platform, perhaps a bigger platform as well, to empower people to change the world. And I'm sure you were doing that, and you were starting to explore the possibilities of being used by God in the calling He's given you before COVID-19 and lockdown.
Yeah.
And now you're stuck at home, right? So how's that transitioning on? That's one transition that took place from campus missionary to lead pastor, and now you're to transition from being able to travel wherever you wanted to being stuck at home, but you still have the same passion. How have you managed that? How has that impacted you, and how have you managed that?
That's a very good question. I think the whole stuck at home thing, I think it hit me a few days after, where I think the first week was kind of fun,
Yep.
Hey, this doesn't feel like work, or all the meetings are online, but I do miss meeting people. I do miss meeting interacting with new people, but obviously I can't do that now. But I think that translated to more social media presence. When I say social media presence, I've been actively talking about certain things online that I don't usually talk about pre-COVID days. There had been a lot of political tension that came with the virus here in the country.
Yes.
The next generation have been vocal about certain things, and I wanted to engage with them in that scenario. Even though I'm not in campus anymore per se. I still go to campus. I still have a campus group. But I'm always have this next generation heart. So I engage a lot of people now online.
Yep.
It's just that the past weeks, it's been very politically motivated. I'm not very comfortable with that, but I think with the wisdom of God, we're able to find the conversations that we need to be involved in, and the conversations we don't want to be a part of, to engage mindsets, to engage So there's been I have several posts now that have been shared a lot. I'm surprised at how many times some posts were shared,
Wow.
even by non-Christians. And I think that was a testament to, okay, God, you really want me to do this at this time.
Yep.
So
Wow.
there's been a lot of that. A lot of meetings like this, Zoom meetings in my Victory group. Interestingly, a lot of them can attend now, because before, when we have to like meet up somewhere, half of them would be canceling
Yes.
before we start. So now a lot of people have time, so I actually get to have more conversations with them,
Mm.
um, because of this.
Well, just as you were talking, it made me think of two questions. The first one is, I know that you're a passionate evangelist and you love connecting with people. Do you have any testimonies of how you've been used by God in online engaging? I suppose you could say maybe that's something that could really encourage us here in Melbourne, because we're under similar movement restrictions as Manila,
Yeah,
only allowed out for very specific reasons. And secondly, it's interesting that you talk about the politicalization
yeah,
of this disease, COVID-19, and people's responses to it. How do you navigate? Obviously there's people wanting to blame people, people wanting to defend people,
yeah,
and there's lots of anger. There's a history
yeah,
of activism in the Philippines, with people power and all that kind of stuff. How do
yeah.
you how do you navigate how do you navigate a conversation where someone says, "Oh, I hate so and so," or you can't say that about this person because
Yeah.
we have to respect them, or we should be praying for them, or
Yeah.
what do you think is a biblical perspective in terms of steering a political conversation, maybe to
Mm.
more more root issues from a
Yeah.
Christian perspective? And so that's just two questions there: the evangelism side of things, the engaging online, and the second one is um, the how do you navigate political conversations that start off political, and then how do you steer them?
Move to yeah, it's been a very creative season. First of all, I always believe, now I don't know if a lot of people would agree with me in this, especially Christians, but I always believe that the gospel is the answer to any issues in the world. Now hear me out. It's because all the issues in the world are caused by a certain sinful nature. I'm not saying that the gospel will answer my financial woes or will change the politics scenario of the country. What I'm saying is the gospel of Jesus Christ, the more we understand its implication, his life, his death, and his resurrection, and what has
Yes.
done in us, can actually answer causes of um, certain issues, whether that's family issues, whether that's a relational issue, whether that's like a sexual issue, whatever kind of issue that we have in the world. There is a root of our sinful nature, and the gospel has addresses that.
Yes.
So for me to be in conversations like that, I initially engaged with, because I saw a lot of, and I love next generation being passionate, but
Yes.
sometimes even Christians can get so heavy-handed on things that they would forget that they're Christians. But I think that conversation of, if I'm a Christian, can I not be angry of if I see something wrong? I think that's one of the main conversations I've had with a lot of people, that you actually can. You were allowed to be angry. You were allowed to. And then I talked about, but in anger we do not sin. And I talked about how, when we call someone raka, or which means really a fool or empty-headed, we have a very, very specific Filipino word for that a lot of people were using, being thrown out because of what's been happening. So I addressed that particular, and then I talked about how, as Christians, we do not devalue someone. I think that anger becomes a sin when we use that to devalue someone. When we call a person a name or a term that diminishes the value of that person, which is equivalent to the blood of Jesus. So that started this whole thing of me talking about how the gospel. It's, obviously, I should be angry. I should be angry because of injustice. I should be angry because of the things that I see that are not fair. With poor people receiving the shorthand of of the government or whatever that issue is. But like what I said, we cannot demean people, but at the same time, justice is also the message of the gospel, that and because of the justice that we deserve to die. So that there's so many factors that I were able to figure out the where the gospel comes in. At the same time, I think my favorite part is now, yes, we feel injustice. Yes, we see these things happening. What are we doing about it? Are we just posting online? Are we just all angry online? Maybe there's some things that we can do with. Maybe we can prepare for something so we can do now, so that when lockdown finishes, we can go out and be prepared to do something. Whether that's serving the community, whether that's actually feeding the poor, whether that's. But I think I wanted to talk about how let's do that because we understand the gospel, because we understand their value, that we treat them as human beings, that we treat them with fairness, that we treat them with justice, because we understand that the blood of Christ was shed for them as well. So I think that whole sensitivity to the current state and really digging our feet in the gospel with the wisdom of God really provides a way for us to understand, with this whole scenario, where does the gospel fit in? Where does the message of the gospel come in? So it's been a very exciting season for me to talk about that. It's been a very, it's not just an exercise of my intellect, but like really an exercise of what really do I know about the gospel? How do I really see the gospel at work? So I think it's been a very creative season for me in regards to that.
That's awesome, Edrei. I loved your answer. I loved your whole answer, but what really stood out to me, really resonated with me, and maybe it's an every nation thing. I hope it is. Anyway, it's definitely a biblical thing. Is that the gospel is always the answer? It really is. I think, and you kind of you were kind of like trying to be apologetic for saying that, but I think that's because in the church, maybe what we've done is we've reduced the gospel down to a message of personal salvation, which of course is true. There is good news in that I'm forgiven for my sins, but the gospel is actually so much bigger. It's Jesus in Mark chapter 1 says he goes through all. Jesus went through all of Galilee preaching the good news or the gospel, saying the time is now here. Repent, for the kingdom is at hand. Jesus' gospel is the gospel of the kingdom, and his kingdom is a just kingdom, and his kingdom is a loving kingdom, an empowering kingdom. And I always like to think, Jesus didn't just die to set us free from personal sin. Wherever there's sin, where there's organizational or systemic or societal sin, or even the brokenness. It's not just even sin; it's brokenness, right? Brokenness in nature. So I would go as far to say is that the gospel is the answer to our ecological issues, or our environmental issues, our economic issues, our political issues. The gospel is so much bigger than my personal ticket to get to heaven. And it's interesting. I also found it interesting you were talking about how is it easier said than done to be angry and not sin? What's the purpose of anger? What are your thoughts on that? I liked what you said about. One way we know we've crossed the boundary from anger to sin is when we start to demean people, and I think what's at the root of that is, that who we're talking about is an image bearer of God, right? Like they might not even love God. They might be radically blasphemers or whatever, but they're still made in God's image, right? And to demean God's image in that person that's blasphemy.
That's true.
What do we do with our anger? What are some of the ways you've seen people be a bit more productive? You mentioned some kind of like charitable things or whatever, but what are some of the other ways you've seen people direct their anger? What are some positive applications you've seen of, because we are meant to get angry at injustice. We should. God gets angry at injustice. So how have you seen people in Manila change the way that they address life because of the anger's catalyzed them to action?
Right. Yeah, I've been actually seeing several. One of the guys in my group, um, together with several former Every Nation campus students that are now working, and they're across the world, and have been trying to um, coordinate a project. Because one of the I, I totally agree with the lockdown. I agree with social distancing, and but there are. It's just that obviously I'm coming from a specific place where I have a comfortable house. We have food, uh, but there are people that they don't have that. That if they don't work, they're not gonna eat anything.
Yep.
So we have one of our students started organizing a fundraising for, and his target market was we call them tricycle drivers. For those of you Filipinos who are watching, but you've been in a tricycle, right?
I have, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Memorable
So
experience.
so their village is like one of the biggest village in Asia. Like about 75,000 people live in that one whole village. It's called BF Homes.
Wow.
So the public transport there inside would be tricycles, and what they wanted to do was very simple project of raising up funds. They wanted to support uh, several families that would need about 5,000 or about 10,000 pesos each, and I
Wow.
think they're targeting like 20 families of tricycle drivers. Uh, and that's one of those so one of them is like a chill guy, I don't like injustice, but I'm not a very active online post. I don't necessarily post online, but one of them is like very passionate about this, so he found this project to be his way of, because I'm angry with injustice, we'll do something about it.
Yes.
And that for me was a huge testament of that's what we do with our anger. That's what we find something to, let's turn that anger into passion. Let's turn that anger as fuel to do something. I mean, anger is a good thing. I mean, Jesus got angry,
Well, that's right.
flip tables.
Yes.
Yeah, but I think the whole understanding of anger for me came because of marriage. How do I get angry? When me and my wife had an argument, how do we become angry without demeaning each other? Because we love each other.
Yes.
Uh, so I think that whole practice developed that, okay, I can actually be angry. I can actually say what I'm angry about without putting the other person's value down.
Yes.
So I think that's where it came from, and to see people do that. I think part of my post was, bottom line, this is an issue of discipleship. If I'm angry about injustice, I need to disciple more people so that they will not do injustice, or when they become influential. So I need to disciple them to become influential as well, so that they will not do injustice or change the whole system entirely.
Mm.
So that, for me, that's how I'm funneling my anger. That's why I've had several meetings with my group, because the past few weeks we've been discussing on Nehemiah. Well, we're on chapter 4 now, um, and it was really about nation building.
Yes.
So I think our premise was, when this is all over, we need to rebuild the nation. So let's look at how Nehemiah did it, and
Yep.
what are the principles that we can take. And even then, he had people who were against him and whatnot. So yeah, so it's been I think for me, on my part, the anger was producing good conversation
Yes.
with people. It's been allowing me to really ask God for wisdom,
Yes.
and I think in humility too, because there's a very thin line, obviously, of
Sure. Yep.
crossing that. So there are times when me and Christine talk, when me and my wife talk, we'll be like, what are we angry about? Can we figure out what we're really angry with this issue, with this scenario, and let's figure this out. So yes, uh, a lot of process has been that we've been going through. I think the lockdown has been helping with that.
Sounds like
uh,
a fruitful time.
yeah,
Just as I've been listening, like I think I'm drawing a connection between, you're seeing how you're saying before that this time has kind of got you thinking about the gospel and its comprehensive nature, and then an application of that, it seems to be, is discipleship is also comprehensive. Where what I find really interesting is people look to governments to be their personal savior, right? If there's an injustice, the government should do something about it. If there's and of course they should. I'm not saying that they shouldn't do something about it, but it's almost like it's governments can easily, if we're not careful, we can put them in a proxy place for God, right? The government becomes our provider. And I'm not saying that the government shouldn't provide. I'm not saying the government shouldn't do good stuff. Of course, they should be doing good things. But I liked how you were challenging people about discipleship, because if you can change people externally by bringing in laws, right? The laws of the land. But what Jesus offers, and what's powerful about his kingdom, is that he changes people internally. And if you make enough disciples in a nation, then you disciple the nation. And that's what I love about the Great Commission. Jesus says, "Go into all the world, make disciples of all the nations." And so I loved how you were challenging the guys you were talking to about, let's make this is a discipleship issue. Let's preach the gospel. Let's disciple people. And then we can be the change that we want to see. We don't have to worry about who the president is or the prime minister or who the mayor is. No, it's interesting. Maybe can you, Edrei, like for a lot of our listeners here a lot of our members, at least in Every Nation Melbourne, I don't know if any of them are listening, but for a lot of our members here in Every Nation Melbourne, the idea of poverty, like we have poor people in Australia, but poor people in Australia are still rich by world standards.
Yeah.
What's that dimension of poverty doing in terms of the impact of COVID-19 in Manila?
Yeah, it's been I think a lot of the anger of the next generation was really triggered by, I think, at least from their perspective. I'm not saying this is mine, but at least from their perspective, that a lot of things were implemented without considering how different the poor lives here compared to the other countries who've been imposing the lockdown. Because a lot of people here really, they live based on what they can sell for the day, or if they can provide a certain service for the day, that really involves them in going out selling vegetables, for example, or basic needs, or doing service for whether that's plumbing or things like that, because blue collar jobs here doesn't pay well. So it's been a very, 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 very sad thing to see sometimes, that when we would see people go out obviously there are people that are just really not just ignoring the lockdown or whatever, but there are people that are really just affected by the whole thing, because they do have to work. They do need finances, and we don't see anything. At least from the initial phase of the lockdown, we didn't see any, say, electricity bills or the electric companies telling us that, okay, you won't need to pay for this month, or certain services that would allow the people who are less privileged to breathe a little. I think some of them are starting to do something. Part of it, because a lot of people have been active on social media to voice out their concerns about that, and I think that's powerful. But I think I guess what COVID-19 brought us is really a picture of how bad our system is as a country.
Yep.
It became a mirror of what are some of the injustices, and how significantly different the rich and the poor in our society is.
Yep.
It was a mirror to our soul as a nation, and I think that was a powerful thing to. Obviously, a lot of people were not comfortable, but I feel like that's a divine move. That's also God showing us what needs to be done, what he is changing, and what kind of people he is raising up.
Yes.
That's why for me, when I saw that mirror, it gave me hope. It
Yep.
gave me hope for the ministry. It gave me hope for God. This is what you've called us to do. It gave me hope for uh, that God is in control, obviously. But
Yes.
I think that hope that a lot of people are not so blind anymore, are not so, just because we're comfortable, because we're privileged, this doesn't affect me, so I'm not gonna do anything about it. But now we see that everyone is affected.
Yes.
Whether that's the sickness or the whole system thing in the Philippines.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
yeah,
definitely,
it's been,
well, sorry to cut you off there, Edrei. There's
no,
definitely
no,
a sense of that affluence or comfortableness can be like an anesthetic for the soul, where we
yeah,
don't really, we just kind of self-medicate with all our material stuff, and sometimes I wonder if that's why there seems to be a resistance to the gospel in Australia. We're lucky in material means, but maybe we're also just numbed and blinded to our real spiritual needs as well.
yeah.
I was wondering, Edrei, if we could go back to this question I sent you earlier. If you could go back 4 weeks in time or 5 weeks in time to Edrei Canda, Pastor Edrei, lead pastor at Victory Alabang, and you've got a passion to change the world through these young men you've been discipling and now out there in the workplace, and you had no idea that COVID-19 was going to keep you locked up at home for the next 4 weeks, and who knows how long it's going to go for, right? But what would you say to encourage that Edrei of 4 to 5 weeks ago,
Cool.
whose hair was shorter, had a nice fresh haircut, and was ready to take on the world with all of your plans?
Yeah.
What would you say to encourage? What would you say to prepare that Edrei?
Okay, before I answer that, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to tell myself. I was having a hard time earlier because seeing what has happened. I have an initial answer, or maybe I should say this to myself. Maybe this, but seeing what has transpired over the past months, past weeks, and seeing how real this virus is,
Yes.
up close. I There was a verse though that kept ringing to me, a chapter actually, and this was, I don't know if you guys saw The Chosen already. The very very first episode of do you know that TV series?
I've heard of it, and I've seen you
Oh
post
man,
about it, and other people have suggested we should watch it. So maybe Kira and I will get on the Chosen bandwagon. But we still
yes.
got we haven't finished watching Crash Landing on You yet. So we
Oh.
got to finish that one, and then
Finish that one also. Okay. But the very very first scene, they quoted Isaiah 43, especially verse 1. But I want to read until verse 2. This is for Israel, of course, but I feel like this is very relevant to the whole thing that we are in. But it says here, Isaiah 43 verse 1, but now thus says the Lord, he who created you, O Jacob, he who formed you, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. And it just got so real when I was reading this in the middle of the whole thing. Especially verse 2. So verse 1, there was just an establishment of an identity for Israel, and I took it.
Good.
For me, we're part of this, of his kingdom.
Yes.
But I love that it says, "Fear not, for I have redeemed you," because fear has been a very operative word for
Yes.
so many areas of our society, or whatever country we may be in. And then verse 2, when you pass through the waters. And I love that because it was when you pass, meaning you haven't passed it, but when you pass, or when you go through the river, or when you go through fire.
Yes.
I was reading this, we were already passing the water. We were already passing through the river. You were already passing through fire.
Yes.
So this was a reminder of, wow, God, you've been promising your grace and your protection and your love over us. I'm not saying that, because of this, we're not going to get the sickness. We're not going to, we need wisdom for so many things.
That's right, yes.
And I'm not saying that God is not protecting those who got the virus, or people who may have passed. God has a different hand. I mean, God is obviously doing something there, individually, and God is a loving God.
Yes.
That's why He resurrected. We have hope for death. But for me, this was something I was holding on to. That, Lord, now we found ourselves in fire. Now we found ourselves in the middle of the river.
Yes.
And this is something that God, I will not fear. So this was, if there's anything, I know I gave a long answer for this, but
no, that's great.
It's been a very real verse.
I love it. That's a great answer to the question. Maybe I was thinking if I could go back, in 4 weeks' time, I'd tell myself the lottery numbers to win the lottery and have lots of money. But to go back in time and to minister to yourself with the scripture, with Isaiah 43, and even just hearing you share it, just really powerful. And and I've thought about that passage as well. I've called you by name. Child, you are mine. That whole idea that. I mean, God's speaking to Israel, but he says that over us as well. Edrei, I've called you by name. Hey Ken, 4 weeks ago, Ken, God's called you by name. He's got you, and it's going to be challenges. It's going to be difficult, but you're going to come through. And maybe it's fire, maybe it's water, maybe it's COVID-19, right? But He's with us and He's for us, and I love it. That's great. Well, we're a little bit over time, but I think this has been particularly encouraging for me, and I hope for all of those who are on the chat there. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and for those who are watching it later on as we add it to our YouTube channel, the Every Nation Melbourne YouTube channel. I suppose maybe just do a quick speed round for Pastor Edrei. I'm going to ask you some questions. And don't think too much about them. There's no right or wrong answers. Well, you might get fired if Pastor Marcus, is it? No, what's it? Pastor Ariel. If he sees the answers, he might fire you. But otherwise, nothing to be afraid of. So just, what's your favorite food, Edrei?
Pizza.
Okay. What topping?
Pepperoni and pineapple.
Okay, I was about to ask you, does pineapple belong on a pizza? And you said yes.
Yes.
What about anchovies? Okay, so you're not an anchovies lover. Well, we can't be friends anymore. What's your? I know you used to be a death metal lead singer, I think. What's your favorite kind of music?
I actually love boy bands.
Boy bands? Okay. Are you into BTS?
Kinda.
Okay.
Kinda. But there's a local one that I'm
sure.
standing now.
Okay, awesome. If you could have any superpower, what superpower would you have?
Flight.
Flight. Okay.
I want to travel.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Who's your favorite? Well, okay. So yeah, flight in Manila would be when the traffic is back. It's definitely would be a very useful superpower for sure.
Yeah.
What about who's your favorite preacher or theologian?
Ooh. Preacher, Louis Giglio, Tim Keller, Pastor Steve.
Okay, yes.
For obvious reasons.
Yes.
Pastor Jansen Moradas also.
Pastor Jack, who was that?
Jansen.
Oh, Pastor Jansen. Okay, nice. Excellent. Okay, pie or cake? Pie. Okay, you like the pastry. You're a pastry man?
Pastry, yeah.
Come on, that's what pie brings to the party is pastry. What it would be when COVID-19 is all over, what will be your first date night activity with your lovely wife?
We'll eat ramen.
Ramen. Well, okay, you've just touched a raw nerve with me, because ramen's become very popular here in Melbourne in the last few years. But there's a soup here, a noodle soup that's been a part of Melbourne society for the past 40 years, which is Vietnamese soup, pho.
And
whenever I want to go out for noodle soup, all the guys in church want to go out and get ramen, and I go, guys, what about the OG, the original pho? And so, yes,
pho's not bad. I love me some pho.
Well, no, I'm sorry, Edrei. Pho is not only not bad; it's way better than ramen. Okay. Derek in the chat has asked about char kway teow. Well, that's not a noodle soup. That's a laksa though. Laksa noodle soup is very good, and I would prefer laksa over ramen any day of the week.
Yeah. I
So
can't eat laksa though because they're shrimp.
I
I
can
would
eat it.
love to, but they're
Well,
shrimp. So
you're allergic to shrimp as well.
yeah.
Okay, interesting. I'm also allergic to shrimp, but I can have laksa, even though it might have shrimp in it. I just take it out. If you weren't living in Manila, which city of the world would you want to live in?
Okay.
Melbourne. I think you said Melbourne. So let it be known that forever, once it's on the internet, it's never coming back. It's out there. It's always out there. That Pastor Edrei, if he wasn't living in Manila, he would like to live in Melbourne. And
I'll say why. I'll answer why. Because, and this is not because you're doing the interview, okay, man. This is because of the so many relationships and friends we have in Melbourne. Obviously, I have friends in other parts of the world also, but there's just the volume of family and friends, and
yes,
you guys.
Yes.
It's just Melbourne's close to our heart.
yes,
Me and my wife.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. We all. Well, I don't think I mentioned, but we first met when you led a 10 days team from Victory Alabang. You led a whole bunch of ladies out here. You were the only man,
Yes.
and that was quite a powerful time. We did a camp. We did a student camp. And it was a great time, and you know, we really, I suppose, started our friendship, and over the years it's been consolidated. And I really want to thank you, Pastor Edrei, for being part of this first discussion, Meta. So I hope it's gone well. I hope that you've got something out of it. I know as you were sharing about Isaiah 43, I felt really, I suppose, emotional. And maybe probably wasn't showing it, but on the inside, I was definitely feeling encouraged, and it was powerful. So thank you so much, Pastor Edrei. Please pass our love, on to Tin. What can we be praying for you guys for? Is there anything that we can be praying for you as a church, or I don't know, just you've been such a blessing to us tonight. We'd love to be praying for you guys for something.
First of all, I had so much fun. This is great idea, brother. This is amazing. I think we need to do this also. No, but I guess prayer for us would be that me and my wife get really closer, because just this whole time we're really learning new things about ourselves. So this was really a fun thing as well. I think wisdom also into how to continue navigating the whole lockdown, ministry-wise. And we're still praying for a baby. We're praying for little kiddos here in the house. So
yes, absolutely. Well, we'll definitely be praying for those things. And thank you once again so much, Edrei. And stay on. I'll close the chat down shortly, but stay on, and we'll finish up chatting. But well, guys, I'm Pastor Ken, and this has been Meta, our discussions or conversations to provide wisdom, insight, hope, courage beyond ourselves. So the word meta, sometimes it's used in so many different ways, but it's actually also has a meaning of above or beyond. And so it's just been great to have Pastor Edrei share some perspectives that are beyond our perspectives. Obviously, another country, a highly dense city with poverty as a real social issue, and it's been great to hear his perspectives on what happens when we get angry at government? What do we do with that? Do we just become keyboard warriors and insult our politicians, or maybe there's something else that we can use our anger to inspire passion to actual real action and real change, and it's just been great hearing Pastor Edrei's perspectives and insight onto the gospel and discipleship. And I think if we can learn from this in every nation in Melbourne, then we will be growing in the calling and the destiny that God has for us. So I just want to thank you, Pastor Edrei, so much for joining us. I want to thank you for everyone who's been listening on the live stream. And well, that's it from me. I'm Pastor Ken. All right, be blessed.
See you guys.